a moment with remarks by Vice President Dan Quayle and House Majority Leader Dick Gephardt of Missouri.
Saturday on C-SPAN, Secretary of Health and Human Services Louis Sullivan meets with Washington journalists at a Knight Ridder Newspapers luncheon. Tune in at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2 p.m. on the West Coast.
Coming up next, more from the 31st Annual Public Policy Conference hosted by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. The committee exists to lobby Congress on legislation affecting U.S. Israel relations and maintain a liaison with executive branch agencies on behalf of a strong U.S. relationship with Israel. About half an hour from now, you'll hear Vice President Dan Quayle outline the administration's policies toward the Middle East. But first, remarks by House Majority Leader Dick Gephardt. He talks about Congress's role in U.S. Middle East policy.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Bob Mazur, Chairman of AIPAC's 31st Annual Policy Conference, and an exciting one it's going to be. The presence here in our nation's capital of a record number of participants helps set to rest the reports about an end of a love affair. The pro-Israel forces here in America are growing, not shrinking, not a shrinking number. Your numbers attest to that fact. It is especially gratifying to see so many of you who will attend your, It's especially gratifying to see all of you anyways, who will end at the end of your attendance by visiting your elected officials. Imagine the impact of 1,000 pro-Israel citizen lobbyists on Tuesday morning at the Capitol. Your voices will be heard, your concerns will be addressed, you will state the case for the U.S.-Israel relationship, and you will have an effect. I urge you to attend many of the scheduled sessions as you are able. A skilled crew of professional and lay leaders will hand you the tools you will need to be an effective lobbyist, both Tuesday morning here in Washington and later when you continue your lobbying efforts in your home districts. We've scheduled much in the next 48 hours with outstanding speakers and programs. This conference promises to be informative, thought-provoking, and stimulating. In conclusion, don't just get ready to sit back and enjoy. Rather, I urge you to actively participate. Through your participation, you will come away with a renewed sense of why we do what we do, in order to maintain and strengthen this special and mutual beneficial relationship that exists between the United States of America and the State of Israel. And now on.
Despite what the program says, I am Marshall Brockman from the great state of Texas, from Fort Worth, Texas. And I'm glad to see you all here, too. It's a great privilege for me to introduce House Majority Leader and former contender for President of the United States, Richard Gephardt of St. Louis. I think they like you, Dick. 4 days from now, Dick will complete his first year as Majority Leader of the House of Representatives. His rapid rise to the ranks of leadership surprised none of his friends and certainly none of his colleagues. Elected in 1976, Dick was immediately recognized as the leader of the emerging group of post-Nixon Young Turks that now constitute almost 70% of the House of Representatives. During his 14 years in office, Dick has developed a reputation as an earnest, well-organized, respected, and skillful legislator. He is known and is a great listener. Moreover, his powerful advocacy on behalf of a strong U.S. Israel relationship has made him well known to the pro-Israel community. Dick is best known for his work in the realm of trade and economic issues. He was the originator of Bradley Gephardt tax bill, the prototype of the eventually what became the Tax Reform Act of 1986. Currently, he's the leader of the budget summiteers, members of Congress who are meeting with the President to work out a compromise budget resolution. Those discussions will, in all likelihood, determine the future levels of overall foreign aid spending. As a member of the Ways and Means Committee, Dick was a principal co-sponsor of the U.S. Israel Free Trade Agreement and has remained a staunch defender of the free trade area since its inception. Even though the F-15 is made in St. Louis, Dick has been a tremendous help in opposing arms sales to Israel's enemies throughout these many years. I just asked him if it was okay if I had that in there, and his response was, they know what my record is. During his trip to Israel in 1984, Dick gained an appreciation for the land, the people, and its unique security needs. He learned first foot, so to speak, of the terrain and layout of Jerusalem in daily runs around the wall in Jerusalem with Tom Dine up and down those beautiful hills in that beautiful city. Upon returning, he stated, there's a great difference between being told how important the Golan Heights are and actually standing on top of the area to see for yourself what control of that area means for Israel. I have felt lucky to have been able to call Dick and Jane Gephardt my personal friends. Ladies and gentlemen, we are lucky to have such a strong and powerful voice supporting the U.S.-Israel relationship in the U.S. House of Representatives. Please join me in welcoming our friend, House Majority Leader Dick Gephardt.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Marshall, very much. I'm thrilled to be here this afternoon with you. I appreciate very much the opportunity to come here for a number of reasons. First, I didn't have to run this morning with Tom Dine. As Marshall said, back in 1984, on a couple of occasions I got to run with Tom. He said the night before, I like to run. He was kind of modest about his running. I thought maybe Tom was one of these novice runners, so we got out there on the hills, and it was the worst experience I've ever had in my life. This man is the finest runner. He could be in the marathon anywhere in the world. He was going up and down these hills. I was huffing and puffing. I'm a real novice. At the end of it, I had great respect for Tom Dine, I want to tell you, and I still do today for a number of different reasons, not just because he's a good runner, but because he's one of the finest people that we have to deal with, along with the rest of the people that you have here on the staff. I think they're among the most decent and fine people that are on the Hill that we deal with, and I appreciate them very much. I've also come to know many of you through the last few years. My travels around the country got me into most of the different parts of the country, and so I really feel at home here with so many good friends that I have made through these last years. And above and beyond that, I'm happy to be here today because the rest of you who don't know me know who I am. After you've run for president and failed, Thereafter, when you go out into the country and airports, restaurants, other public places, people see you, have a glimmer of recognition, but they aren't quite sure who in the world you are. I was in O'Hare Airport the other day and walking down one of those big concourses, and you know, they have the chairs along the side. A woman was sitting there. She spied me from afar, and she literally leapt out of her chair, got right up in front of me. She said, "Wait a minute." She said, "I know you." She said, "You're famous." She said, "You used to be somebody." Another fellow walked along beside me in Denver's airport, staring at me. Didn't say a word, about 2 minutes. It's a long time to have somebody stare at you. Finally, as we were about to step on one of those people movers, he said, "Wait a minute." He said, "I know who you are." He said, "You're Jack Kemp." I could tell you about 10 of these, but I've only got time for one more. I was in the Capitol last week. This is the honest-to-God truth. And I'm always trying to run from one meeting to another, always behind, always late, always in a hurry. And right now we have a lot of senior citizens up lobbying on bills, a lot of seniors from high school, students close up, etc. And I was really in a rush. I got into a hall that was literally packed with senior citizens, and I thought I could kind of duck around behind them. They all appeared to be looking one way, and I could sneak around behind and get through. Unbeknownst to me, a woman in a wheelchair spied me and backed her chair up right against the wall, effectively blocking me from going anywhere. So I stuck out my hand and welcomed her to the Capitol. She put her finger up in my face. She said, "I saw what you were trying to do." She said, "You were trying to sneak around us." She said, "But I know who you are." She said, "You're Vice President Quayle." So I'm really glad to be here and to have a proper introduction. I thought it would be good if I could take my moment today to try to talk about what is happening in the world, which is of such great moment and change. And I think it's worthwhile taking a minute to stand back and to try to interpret, understand, and better deal with the rapidly changing fact situation that we deal with today. Charles Dickens, in his book Tale of Two Cities, had a line that some think probably fits most times, but I think it particularly fits this time, when he said it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And in many ways, that description aptly fits where we are today. The changes that are happening across the world are monumental. And for the most part, I think most of us agree they are positive changes. People reaching out for freedom. Prisoners of conscience being finally freed to live in freedom as they have wanted. From Sharansky to Mandela to people in Nicaragua, people all over the world are reaching out for freedom and opportunity, and all of us are thrilled by that. Last week I had the opportunity to meet with President Gorbachev here in Washington and sit across the table from him and have a conversation about a number of important issues. Much of what he said I thought was very good. He told a story that I think best sums up his attitude about what's happening in his country. He talked about change. He talked about the difficulty of huge change in his society. We talked about the fact that his people didn't want to work and didn't know what it meant to work. We talk about the difficulty of changing an economy that's been in a deep freeze for 70 years to be a vibrant, Western, open, free, capitalist economy. After we had discussed all of the problems at one point in the conversation, He said, you know, these problems are great. We understand that. But he said, if you get scared about the problems, then you're going to scare us. He also said, don't go away downcast, because he said, you know, when we entered this change, we knew that it was going to be difficult. And we knew that there would be confusion and chaos and problems. He said, let me give you an analogy. He said, if we had decided at the outset that we were just going to scrape the paint off the walls and repaint the walls, then all of the problems we were having would really bother us. But he said, we knew that we were trying to tear down the walls and build new ones. And so he said, when you know you're going into that, you know there's going to be dust and confusion and difficulty and pain and sacrifice and tremendous unrest and discomfort. But he said, you know, if we didn't have all of that going on, we would know that we hadn't done the right thing. I thought that was a good way of explaining his attitude, his state of mind, and the attitude that he was trying to get across to his colleagues and his citizens back in the Soviet Union. But at the same time, it's an unsettling message, because he's really saying that we have to be ready for very uncomfortable change. Neil Sedaka used to have a song that you may remember. It was one that I liked. It was, "Breaking up is hard to do." You remember that? Well, I have a corollary. I think change is hard to do. Yet that's what we're embarked on. And while it's a time of great challenge and great opportunity, it's also a time of great danger. One of the other topics that came up in our conversation with Mr. Gorbachev was the need for them to pass a law ensuring the right for people in the Soviet Union to be able to leave the Soviet Union. We insist on that. I was the one that asked the question. I said, Mr. Gorbachev, I'm an advocate of opening up trade relationships with the Soviet Union. I think it would be good for both of us. But in order to do that, we must be assured that this law that you've talked about, that you've said that you want to put on the books, is on the books. There should be no confusion about our goals. There should be no confusion about what we're after. Perhaps the greatest thing that Gorbachev could leave to his country is a set of laws so that human rights and human freedom are ensured for the first time in the Soviet Union. And if we back off and fail to get that law put on the books in our desire to have a normal commercial relationship with the Soviet Union, we will have not done them a favor, and we will not have done ourselves a favor. And what I want to say today is that in the midst of all this change, challenge, and danger, it is perhaps as important as it's ever been that America remain strong and be strong and stand for our values and our beliefs. While the challenges are new, our cause remains the same. America and our foreign policy remain committed to self-determination, human rights, free markets, free institutions, and economic growth. And our policies must fight despotism, terrorism, poverty, and chaos. We tried to impress on Mr. Gorbachev the need for the Soviet Union to continue liberalizing its immigration policies and to continue passing immigration laws. We pointed out that it's not good enough to merely loosen practices that can be changed at the whim of a future Soviet leader. We said it's essential to replace the repressive laws that have blocked immigration for tens of thousands of Soviet Jews. America must stand firm on this issue. We cannot afford to base our foreign policy on one person, one individual, one movement, no matter how charming or how skillful or how promising it may be. I must report to you that when we pressed President Gorbachev on immigration, he bristled. His eyes sparked. He complained that we American congressmen were meddling in his internal affairs. And then, almost inexplicably, he began to meddle in the internal affairs of Israel. He expressed his fear that Israel was using Soviet émigrés as pawns and seemed to warn of a possible clampdown on immigration in order to block new settlements. Gorbachev's comments, I think, betrayed a fundamental failure to grasp the difference between freedom and force. No one is forcing any new Israeli resident to live anywhere, but because the Soviets may not like where they choose to live, they threaten to restrict immigration once again. That is meddling in the internal affairs of another nation. And so we must be strong about what we believe in, what we think is important, what our values are, what we stand for. And as well with the question of Soviet immigration, we in this country must stand by our friends in a time of change. And that means that our commitment to Israel in terms of economic and other kinds of aid must be stronger and firmer today than it has ever been. What would the Israelis think? What would anyone think? If at the time 400,000 or 500,000 or 1 million people are emigrating to Israel, we would turn our back and adopt new priorities. We would turn our back and become only domestically interested, when what we've been asking for, what we've been demanding, what we have been saying for these 25 or 45 years now happens, and America's not to be found. Israel needs our economic aid to take in these people and to accommodate these people and to integrate them into their society more than they've ever needed that aid, and we must stand behind them. At the same time, we must continue to speak out against movements in other countries that we feel are dangerous. And here I speak of anti-Semitism, specifically anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. This was an issue that was also brought up during the meetings in the United States with our friends from the Soviet Union. I met with one Soviet parliamentarian and we had a long discussion about it. He said that he was concerned about it. He said there is anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. It is not a huge danger, he said today, but someday in the future, if things continue to go poorly economically, if there tends to be disintegration in the Soviet Union, if the ethnic hostilities continue to tear the country apart, he worries that anti-Semitism and other problems will come to the surface and complicate their movement toward the future. America, as with Soviet immigration and as with aid to Israel, must stand strong and say to the Soviet government, the government of Poland, the government of every other country in the world, we believe that anti-Semitism is immoral, we stand against it, and we want your government to stand against it. And finally, as the beacon of freedom and hope and opportunity, our country, the United States, at a time when countries are undergoing such tremendous change, have to be the country that says, if you need economic help, if you need economic aid, if you need economic expertise and knowledge and information, which we possess more than any other place in the world, we will be generous with all of that so that your country can learn the way to an open, Western, free economy, and your people can begin to enjoy the kind of standard of living that Americans have enjoyed for, lo, these last 100 years. I was in Eastern Europe in December. I had a chance to meet with the heads of the new governments of Poland and Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and East Germany. I was thrilled by what I heard. I've been waiting to hear it my entire life. They told me how they were excited about the opportunity to have a free and open Western-style economy. They told me about the sacrifices they were going to ask their people to undergo. In Poland, they said food prices will go up 3 times, housing prices 4 times, rent prices will go up. They're going to tear up all the mortgages in the country and raise the interest rate by double. They said the unemployment rate would go from 0 to 20 or 30 or 40% before the markets cleared and prices began to work. When they finished, I said, how are you going to stay in office? I said, if I suggested any one of those things on the floor of the House of Representatives, I'd be impeached. I'd be recalled. And they said, no, you don't understand. This is our chance. Our people want to do this, and they're going to do it. And they're going to do it with excitement and with enthusiasm, because this is our chance. After being locked up for 45 years, we're going to be free, and we're going to have an economy that works. And then I came home, and I was all pumped up and excited. And I came home to the usual wrangle about the budget. People were saying, no, we can't do this, we can't do that. This group would be worried, that group would be worried, we can't do that. Revenues, taxes, oh my Lord, no, we can't do that. It would be too uncomfortable. And then someone said, well, what about the defense budget? The Cold War is over, can we cut that? Oh, we can't do that. It would be too uncomfortable. People would lose their jobs, and contracts would have to be breached, and it would just be too much trouble. We can't think of doing that. And then some people popped up and said the way to solve this problem is to cut foreign aid. And then we heard some saying, how about a beggar thy neighbor foreign policy? Take from this one to give to that one. And then we started to talk about Poland. We need $1 billion for Poland. And someone said, oh, that's too much. And then someone else said, let's take it from somebody else. Let's take it from Israel or Egypt or South America or Africa. And then everybody started grabbing for the pieces. And the Black Caucus men and this caucus men and the other caucus men, and everybody got upset. And I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, after coming back from talking to these people who I think are heroes, and hearing our own people talking as we were talking, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that our country wasn't standing for our values and standing for our traditions and being as good as we can be. I don't want a beggar thy neighbor policy. I want an American policy that stands for the right things. I remember 1947. I remember a country that had just come out of a depression and a war. And I remember a general and a president who went to the American people in 1947. Their names were Marshall and Truman. And they said to the American people, we know you're tired, and we know you're exhausted, and we know the last thing you want to hear about is digging in your pocket and giving money to people that you've just been fighting. And yes, they asked for a lot of money. The Marshall Plan, and I'm not suggesting we need one today, but let's just do a little history here for a minute. The Marshall Plan was $82 billion in today's terms over 3 years. It was wildly popular with the American people. The Gallup poll said 14% of the people favored the Marshall Plan. Big news, huh? Truman was wildly popular. He was riding right at 32% in the polls and going down. He faced an election in 1948. But he didn't back off and try to figure out what people wanted him to do. He figured out what he knew the country should do. Not because it was just good for Germany or Italy or France, but because it was good and in the highest and best self-interest of the American people. That's why he did it. And he stood his ground and he explained it to the American people, and the Congress in a bipartisan way voted for it. And America did what America's best at doing: leading, understanding the common interest, standing for what's right, digging down in our pocket when it takes that to make what's right come true. And we passed the Marshall Plan. Imagine with me for a moment what this world would have been like had we not done the Marshall Plan. Remember, communism was sweeping Europe and could have won elections in all those countries. And then, to refresh your memory again, in 1948, Truman had another tough decision. His advisors came and said, we have to decide whether we support the creation of a state called Israel. The State Department wrote all of their memos, and you can imagine what they said. They said it would be too uncomfortable to be for Israel. They said, you don't want to do that. There are all these other countries around that we'll have problems with. It's really a mess. You don't want to get involved in that. And so Truman went off for a weekend with all of his memos, and as Clark Clifford tells the story, he came back and after having read them all said, I've reached my decision. They said, what is it? He said, we're going to be for the creation of the State of Israel. He said, why? And he said, as only Truman could say it, simply, directly, succinctly, because it's the right thing to do. Ladies and gentlemen, to put my message today very, very simply, we stand in 1990 in a state and time of change and challenge that is probably greater than any time in which we have ever lived. If you think war is a challenge, think about trying to make peace work to talk about a challenge. That is our challenge. And all I want to leave with you today is that I hope and pray that as a people, that we will seize the day, that we will take the challenge, and that we will, in short, stand up for what we believe in and do what is right. And if we will, we'll make this country and we make this world all over again. Thank you very much.
Our coverage of the annual policy conference of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee will continue in just a moment with remarks by Vice President Dan Quayle.
An American Profile on C-SPAN. Take a front row seat for in-depth conversation with the nation's leaders on C-SPAN's American Profiles. This hour-long series, aired throughout the year, features political figures, business leaders, journalists, educators, and others who shape our political culture. It's fascinating and unrehearsed. with insight you can't get anywhere else. C-SPAN, open to the public.